semi-desert region shaped by low precipitation and a landscape both harsh and essential. Nevada rangelands are under threat, jeopardizing wildlife, ranching, migration corridors, and the resilience of the Great Basin.
Since I've been with the department for about a decade, I've seen a lot of this country burn twice in large-scale fires. I think it speaks towards that reduced fire return interval where things burn really quickly or in quicker succession, and it doesn't allow for any sort of response of the vegetation that you might like. Now this site's largely cheatgrass, but you know, when it first burnt and in between the first and the second burn, there might have been a chance or a greater chance for a better response, but now we're just on this super quick fire return interval. Makes restoration really difficult, and I think it just speaks towards cheatgrass's role in feeding fire and wildfire.
Non-native invasive grasses like cheatgrass, ventonata, and medusa head are taking over Nevada's rangelands, disrupting wildlife habitat and reducing forage for livestock. Unlike some other areas in earlier stages of invasion, restoration is necessary in Nevada because it has experienced nearly 70% loss of core sagebrush wildlife habitat since the 1980s. These figures help illustrate the loss of core sagebrush habitat, where green represents intact shrub communities and red shows shrub communities lost to cheatgrass invasion. In 1986, Nevada had around 13.5 million acres of core sagebrush habitat. As a result of multiple threats, those core habitats have shrunk to less than 4 million acres in present day. Wildlife populations have declined significantly as a result of this habitat loss.
If you do the math, and you average this out, it might be a 6 to 8 inch precip zone. But what that is years where you only get 2.5 inches, and some years you get 10, or a little bit better than that on your really record-breaking years, and so it just averages out. Rarely is it actually in the 6 to 8 inch precip zone, and the ecological site description would call for plants that kind of thrive in a 6 to 8 inch precip zone to be replanted here. But if you only get that 2 out of 10 years for establishment, it's really difficult to time your treatments. You can't forecast what a good winter is going to look like. So we have to go where we have clearances and where there's high potential and where we can make some differences. And so we kind of have to make all these worlds collide to protect our core. This is not necessarily, you look at this and you're like, that is definitely not core sagebrush habitat, and it isn't. But we can't tell mule deer not to show up here. They're going to come here every year, so it has to be our core. Where you're standing is terminal mule deer winter range for the Area 6 mule deer herd. And these mule deer will travel, 60, 70 miles all the way from summer range. It's a really long travel, and a bunch of that migration corridor looks similar to this. And so on top of just having to take on a huge caloric kind of expenditure to get to winter range, there's really no groceries on the landscape in between here and there. The colder you are, the more calories you're burning. And if you don't have a lot of forage potential at the site, there's not a really good way to replenish those calories. It's a really difficult situation for specific to the Area 6 mule deer winter range. When did you say your family got into this country, Tom?
My granddad bought our ranch in 1947, and I was born and raised on this land. I'm the third generation on this ranch. My boys will be the fourth.
How have you seen cheatgrass move in after the quarter fire?
Well, the cheatgrass, there's always been a little bit here, but never to what we have now, and that's the trouble with fire. You know, we had a bunch of old decadent sagebrush, and the fire burned hot, and so the cheatgrass just moves in. But the nutritional value in cheatgrass is not what a lot of these other plant species are.
Yeah.
They'll graze a little bit of it, but it gets to a certain point and they won't touch it. And so basically this whole area we're looking at is almost unusable to livestock.
Yeah. Do you think you have concerns for like your two boys and what the potential of losing more ground?
The potential for what we're looking at right here, we could lose this whole lower forest pasture of ours to Medusa head if we don't get something done.
No, absolutely.
You know, cheatgrass is really good at what it does, and it totally takes over, and then once it's there, it's really hard to get anything perennial and desirable back in the system. So this is just a little handful of some cheatgrass thatch litter, and you can see all these little individual seeds in here, and these suckers can stay viable for 8 years or something like that. And so it just kind of chooses its best time to germinate. So even if you get rid of cheatgrass for 1 year, there's still 7 years after that where it can germinate and still take over that system.
The reason we need to manage for these annual grasses is basically for more productivity, because we want to keep these lands productive. And when you live in a climate like Nevada we do, where we don't have a lot of precipitation, we have to have these highly desirable plants that can thrive in this kind of an environment. And because as far as I'm concerned, it's good for livestock, and it's good for the business and my bottom line. And what's good for livestock is also good for wildlife and diversity and for public.
Across Nevada, a major effort is underway. Federal, state, and private groups are joining forces to fight back against invasive grasses.
Casey, remind me, do you know when this fire burned? Tabor Flats fire?
I believe it was a 2017 fire.
And you being BLM can really only use your funding on BLM land, is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. We typically fund the BLM portions of these fire rehabs, and then luckily NDOW steps in and will fund the private land portions and state land.
Yeah, it kind of helps us get that larger contiguous treatment to have that larger footprint and improve wildlife habitat over a bigger area. Yeah.
This is pretty typical as far as results for this type of ecosystem. It's kind of I wouldn't say standard treatment, but it's a treatment we do a lot, where we'll masopick right after the fire, come back in a year later and drill seed with a native, non-native mix. And we use that native, non-native mix because it definitely helps keep the cheatgrass out of systems and gets these non-native grasses and forbs and shrubs established in here, and really helps keep those invasive annuals out of here.
Another cool thing about this spot, a lot of these species were seeded in the drill seeding mix, and then the sagebrush and kochia was overseeded, but a lot of this was not seeded too. This needle and thread grass right here, we don't typically include in our seed mixes just because it's really expensive. It's really cool to see that even with all the efforts that we put into this fire, that native natural community is still reestablishing on its own. Yeah, it's super, super exciting to us to see sagebrush coming in like this in a system. I mean, we've had a lot of long-standing relationships with a lot of the landowners in Nevada. It really makes a difference. We're not a very populated state, and so it's kind of that small community feel, and building those relationships and building trust is super important, so that when a fire like this comes through, we can use those relationships and go to those private landowners and just make it one big effort, because wildlife doesn't know the difference between private and public land. They just go where they need to go. So making sure that we can get that habitat back to functioning condition across the whole area is super important for us.
I think really value the partnership, I would say also. I think sometimes when NDOW approaches private landowners and about treating or anything about their private land, they're standoffish, and I totally understand that. And so I think having the ability to have a conversation about, just like we are right now, and being able to do good things for the landscape, both for cattle, quite frankly, and wildlife, is a benefit. And a lot of the land that you own specifically is really important to Nevada's wildlife, and so I think it's a really valuable relationship. So.
When you're out here on these rangelands, these arid, we talk about Nevada rangelands, but there's other states too, but we're all in this together. And we have as much public land in Nevada as we do intermingled with private. We're all in this together.
No, absolutely.
It's not one or the other. So we all want what's best. It's just a matter of what path we're going to take to get there. In order to do it, we've all got to be on the same page and work together.
Yeah.
Because if you don't work together, we're not going to get anything done. But if we can work together, we can get a lot accomplished.
NDOW has actively worked to restore and improve plant community characteristics and wildlife habitat on nearly 800,000 acres. They spent close to $25 million on these efforts that include things such as aerial broadcast seeding and drill seeding desirable native plant species and competitive non-native plant species. Additionally, they've worked to control invasive annual grasses with herbicide treatments on over 200,000 acres, while actively managing pinyon juniper encroachment into sagebrush grasslands and restoring springs and wet meadow habitat throughout the region. With new tools, new technologies, and a renewed focus on managing invasive annual grasses, along with partnerships, strategic deployment of resources across the landscape, and some good old-fashioned hard work, the future of Nevada's rangelands look bright.